No, we're going to talk about two different projects today. I was involved in both of them. But I do want to make it clear that this project we're talking about now, the prime contractor was a firm called the Cadmus Group, and they were the prime. But you can see there were several other firms involved. At that time, my firm was called the Kircher Group. That's the second one up there on the slide. But we were purchased by Mont McDonald a couple of years ago, and I now work for Mont McDonald, which, hey, I'm just curious, how many of y'all have ever heard about Mont McDonald? Biggest firm no one's ever heard of. I see Jeff has. 18,000 people in 63 countries. So it's not an insignificant firm, but I'd never heard of them either until they bought us, so what can I say? All right, so let's go ahead and start with 1308. As Tim indicated earlier, this was one of a series of projects that had been sponsored or that the equipment group had been successful in getting pushed out. I guess I should start, quite frankly, with making you aware of I'm wearing two hats today, and I wear two hats during this whole thing. In addition to my hat as working for Mont McDonald and being involved in these projects that we're going to be talking about, I also chair TRB Equipment Committee AKR 30, and if we have time today, I'll take a couple of seconds to talk about that. But just be aware that AKR 30 is a TRB committee. I'm sure some of the folks at all your agencies attend every year. It's always held in Washington, D.C. It's a huge conference, 13 to 16,000 people attend from all over the country. It's focused on transportation-related matters, but it's a nice mix of DOT personnel as well as consultants, as well as a lot of people from the academic community. So the long and short of it is I'm mentioning this as a way of saying it. I've got a slide that I'll show you later if we have time. Sort of a triangle here, but you've got Tim is the chair of the equipment technical working group at the MAC, at the Maintenance Activities Conference, and then we also have the EMTSP, which of course is the group or the entity that's really organizes these conferences, and NCPP is their contractor. So there's lots of letters here, and it gets a little confusing, but the short version, I just want to invite all of you. We have a committee of 21 members, 25 members currently in the AKR 30. Our focus is on equipment maintenance equipment for the DOTs. Over half our members are either current or past DOT fleet managers. We have Tim is on our committee, Dennis is on the committee. Jeff is on the committee, aren't you? If I remember correctly, Jeff? Well, sorry about that. But I know we've had a good participation from the WashTow folks in the past, and we certainly hope that if any of you are interested in participating, I would encourage you to see if you can get your travel in front of your bosses to try to come to the TRB conference in January. So anyway, this is the team. I'm hoping you can read this stuff because I don't want to sit here and have to read them all to you. As you can see, there were several people on the project team, including myself and Dennis here. There were also, we had several people from FANL. I was just talking to the ODOT folks, and Bruce Erickson was there, and you see some other folks, Megan Jorgensen from ODOT, and I thought we had, I guess Greg Hansen was on this committee, but we had a good committee. They were hard workers, and we got a lot of good feedback, and we feel like this was a pretty successful project. One of the things you're going to see in talking about this project and the next project is some of these projects that are done under this program tend to be sort of guidebook type projects where you've got a problem and you're trying to come up with what is the options and what are the solutions that are desirable under certain circumstances and others might be desirable under others. And then you've got projects where the focus is really to develop some kind of tool. In this case, this was a very tool-focused project. There is an Excel spreadsheet that really it represents most of the work that we did on this project. although there is a report that provides the background to how we ended up developing the project. So that tool we call the 4R tool, and you'll see the reason for that in a moment. So obviously what had happened was that between AKR 30 and the equipment twig, they'd recognized a need to have some kind of tool that would allow you guys to systematically make decisions about whether to repair or whether to replace equipment. Now, I'll tell you right up front that, like the project that comes after it, we acknowledge in this report and in this tool that a lot of your decisions are truly situational based. They're less driven by decisions on whether it makes smart decisions to put money in this piece of equipment as opposed to replacing it, and more driven by the fact that we got snow on the ground and we got people calling up to get their roads clear, and we got to fix this old truck even though it makes no sense whatsoever. So we take that into account. That's part of the thing. So the long and short of it is, though, that you and your other colleagues had decided this would be a project they'd like to see us pursue, and we won this thing through a competitive process. Those R's you see at the bottom of this slide are those 4 R's: repair, rebuild, replace, and retire. That's the 4 things you could potentially do when equipment is down. You can either repair it, you can replace it, you can rebuild it, or you can retire it. You don't make all those decisions at the same time. There is a workflow involved, and that was one of the things, honestly, I will tell you about this project was we redesigned this tool at least 3 times because we were trying to figure out when you're using this in the garage, does this make sense? And that was part of the iterations. We kept iteratively going through this thing to make sure it sort of followed the decision you make as a fleet manager. I think I've already described this, so I'm just going to flip past this thing. As I said, this just describes the objective of the project. The project took the place off of over about 2 years, and as you see, we had 3 phases, and you can, again, you can sort of see the phases we went through. We did make a lot of effort on this thing, and in fact, it's really important on all these projects done through this program. You have a lot of different people that use this work. Some of it are you guys. You guys really are the core focus. But it's also, we try to decide perform these projects in a way that you can use those things to have your people in the field try to follow this guidance, as well as we understand that you, in lots of states, the fleet guy reports to the maintenance guy. You're speaking different languages, so we try to help you do some translation in this so that you can help talk with your bosses. And we also understand you have your bosses, like we saw in here earlier, that come in, and they have some of them are really fleet people and understand what you're talking about. Most of them aren't. So we try to target these guides to address all those different audiences. The core part of this project, or the background for this research, really focused on a survey that was sent to all the state DOTs, as well as a list of other Canadian agencies in Puerto Rico and so on and so forth, of which we got 38 DOT respondents. We actually got 40-some total respondents because we actually sent it to multiple people in the DOTs because we weren't sure who was best able to respond. But we ended up with 38 states worth of responses. Where we got multiple responses from a state, we basically merged their responses together to have one point of view from the state. And I guess as a sidebar, I will tell you this: one of the dangers for researchers like us and any project is what you call adverse selection. You get somebody from that state, you talk to them, and you get feedback from them on any given topic, and you just have to assume that they're speaking for the most people in that state or in their positions. And that's not always true. That's where you get what researchers would call adverse selection. So when you get these things, I guess the point I'm driving at here is when you get something like this from this and it says it's a NCHRP research project, it's about a fleet topic, please take time to either complete that by yourself or have one of your deputies that is very knowledgeable complete it, because it can send us off in the wrong direction real easily if we get response from you that suggests something that's not really what you think. So I guess that's my, what would you call it? That's my thought for the day. In any event, we went through there, we heard all kinds of different ways that DOTs were deciding when to repair or replace equipment. But in terms of general categories, we sort of lumped, most of them fell into one or two big buckets. Those buckets were an economic lifetime. That's where you were looking at the decision in terms of doing a life cycle analysis, and here's my capital curve, and here's my maintenance and repair curve, and I want to try to replace this equipment when it's down there at the lowest point when I can. That'd be an economic lifetime approach. That's a great approach to do. It can be really hard to sometimes try to actually practically administer it. And so a lot of DOTs also use just a plain old repair limit approach. In those instances, I think I'll just lay out a simple example. The fleet manager, especially in some of the states like maybe Montana, or you may be in this move, or Jeff, or the folks, where most big dollar decisions tend to be made by the fleet managers instead of being made by the field personnel. And a lot of those DOTs, they've got an upset limit to where if you're the shop manager out this thing, if the repair is less than $5,000, you don't have to talk to nobody. You got the authority to make that decision. That would be a repair limit. If you got a piece of equipment, that another example of a repair limit though, that's a little different, but it's still effectively works the same way, is that lots of states use a rule of thumb that says whatever the current value of this equipment, whatever the current value of this equipment is, we're not going to spend more money than that equipment is worth today, because then it would be upside down on that piece of equipment. We're not going to get enough life of it. That'd be another example. And then the third example, and this is a fairly common one. How much have I spent life to date on this piece of equipment? How much did I pay for this equipment? It's what I call lifetime cost. In cases, and those are really what I call good rule of thumbs, because the reality is you guys have got thousands of vehicles, thousands of decisions to make about these vehicles, when to repair, when to replace, etc. So this is some rule of thumb decision making, and it's pretty broadly used. And I think in most cases there's a lot of articles you've seen where this is pretty commonly used in both the private and the public sector. So like I said, this is pretty much a tool-focused project. So I'm going to summarize the tool, and then I've got a video that I'm going to show you, because I've already tried doing a couple of live presentations where I get this video up on Excel and I start trying to walk through an example, and I end up doing something, the screen starts to shake and everybody starts to get motion sickness. So I decided that wasn't a good thing. So I actually had one of the folks that was on this project, John Hildreth, who's a professor and does these things well. We had John record a couple of videos that talk about this tool. So we'll be doing that, and hopefully he'll do I think he does a nice job of explaining how this thing works. As I indicated, there's 4 potential decisions. There was 2 models that we developed. One was the decision model. This was what I would call a flowchart based model, where you just step through different options. It was somewhat analytical, required a little bit of information about the value of the asset and what its operating costs were and how much it had been used, and so on and so forth. And the tool would actually generate a recommended action. We'll be discussing that. That was one module within this tool. There are 2 modules within the tool: the decision module and the economic analysis module. The economic analysis module is much more quantitative. It really does this life cycle costing kind of approach, and it actually compares moving forward. If you repair this equipment, or if you replace this equipment, or if you rebuild this equipment, how many years will it take before that proves to be the wrong decision? Because at some point, a piece, you're always going to exceed the cost of the old equipment of what a newer one would do. And this, bottom line is, this model actually provides you the ability to do that, but it's a little tougher to work simply because the information requires a little more work to get to it, but it's certainly doable. There's good instructions in the tool on how to do that. Here's what I talked about, that in reality, a fleet manager like you guys doesn't decide am I going to rebuild this piece of equipment? Am I going to replace it? Am I going to get rid of it? That's not the first thing you decide. The first thing you decide is, am I going to fix this thing or not? So that's the reason we have at the beginning of the flow chart, if you're going to repair this thing, then you've got a decision of whether you're going to repair it, which we defined in this report, repairing it means to returning it to service in the same condition as it was pre-repair. So in other words, whatever that was, it's still a 10-year-old piece of equipment. You haven't done anything to it to extend its life. You just fixed what was wrong. That's a repair. A rebuild is when you actually invest enough money in that equipment to actually extend its working life to some level. Now, one of the problems we ran into in this report, and I think you guys would have to agree, everyone's opinion of what a rebuild is different. I mean, some people say, I'll throw a new engine in that truck, it's been rebuilt. Well, it's still got every mile it's been put on that drivetrain and on the body and everything else. So is that rebuilt? I don't really think so. But it certainly has at least one component that's been replaced. And has it added some lifetime? Maybe not, because still if the differential goes out, the transmission goes out, the fact that it's got a new engine just means that you're that deeper in the hole. So the bottom line is your first decision is repair versus rebuild, which is your top blank. And then, of course, the tool is designed to help you decide, should you rebuild it, repair it? And if you're going to rebuild it, how do you know how much to invest and it makes sense? Now, that's actually that second tool will give you that question based on your information. Now, the second decision is you're not going to repair it. So what are you going to do with it? Are you going to get another unit like it? Or are you just you weren't using that unit anyway, or you're just going to retire it? That's basically retiring it, is you're getting it out of the fleet and you're not replacing it. So that's your 4 decisions. And as I said, in this model or in this tool, it helps you walk through the logic on those decisions. This is what the one of the outputs of this, this is one of the tabs. This model has, I think it's 4 tabs on it. We'll see it in a minute anyway. It doesn't particularly matter. But one of the things we did do that I thought was pretty cool was that rather than saying it's black and white, that you either fix it or you don't fix it, or you repair it or you don't repair it, or you rebuild it, what we really recognized was these are all sort of on a continuum. In some cases, the choice to rebuild is real strong. Sometimes the choice to repair is real strong. And in fact, we find in most DOTs the default decision in almost 80% of the cases just repair it, because that's typically, you don't have a lot of options other than that, especially if you're in your high demand season, emergency response, winter maintenance, whatever. So your default decision tends to be, in your market, tends to be repair, period. But regardless, to the extent that it's how strong is that decision versus the other ones, we call this a steam pressure model. It actually has a little dial, if you can see it there, that tells you how strongly this tool suggests that decision to be. And even though it'll come up with a recommendation at the end of what it thinks you ought to do, you can look at this thing and see whether it was some decisions are coin tosses. You could have went either way, it really didn't matter. Most decisions you might weigh slightly more, others it might be just as clear as day the way it works. So, like I say, we also included, and John does a nice job in this video, if you look over here, you see these little boxes. This means for each of these factors that you see, that you can decide whether to include that factor in your analysis or not. So when you put a checkbox in that, it means this is not important to me. This isn't driving my decisions. Like, for instance, one of them was there was one of them on environmental issues, which for most point, is like in California, they can't fix an old equipment that's less than Tier 4. So for them, that was the first decision and at the top of the list. Most of you all aren't under that scenario, so you can decide whether that's, and then you have also, you notice these little bars, these are what we call slider bars. This thing has the ability to allow you to weight, to put more emphasis on some of these factors than others. So, and I would also say that, I guess for any people like me that are sort of data geeks, it also uses what they call a beta distribution for this bar, which basically is a way of saying it's pretty insensitive in the middle. It's only when you get towards the extreme ends that it starts putting a lot of emphasis, and that's on purpose, because just moving around in the middle a little bit, you need to have a strong opinion before you really want to change the output of this model. And like I said, here's the way this thing works. When you start this thing, you get an initial score, an initiation score, and John will walk through that. Then you get another decision about, at that point, you get a decision about whether to rebuild or repair. The initiation score is where you start from. You start going through there and deciding how to weight these things and what condition your equipment is, and you end up with these scores. And this is what I was talking earlier. See, in this case, you got a score at 77.8 score to replace this thing rather than to retire it. And this make a little more sense as you see the tool in action. This is the second part of the tool that I mentioned earlier. This is the more analytical part. This is the part where you actually have the ability to look at what the operating costs will be in the future if you make this repairs, or if you rebuild this thing. And in this particular case, you have to provide you have to decide, tell this model, how much am I going to roll the clock back? When you rebuild, you should be, you're making that unit effectively younger. You got to tell the model how much is it making it younger. Is it making it just a little bit or a lot? Am I doing a major rebuild where I'm adding 5 or 8 years to this thing? I have to put a value in there for it. Is it such a minor rebuild that it's not worth it's not going to really last more than 1 more year? You have to put a value in that. And again, this is one of these things where I could sit up here and talk 1,000 hours and you wouldn't know any more than you started. You just really have to get with the tool, and you have to read this information and try to operationalize it a little bit. But it's actually much easier to use than it appears. We did a lot of work, and frankly, Dennis did a tremendous number of case studies in the report where we actually have scenarios. Here's the scenario. This truck's in this condition. This is how much it's going to take to fix it, blah, blah, blah. And it tells you what the outcome would be, and it helps you sort of understand what the sensitivities are in the model. This is what the output of that would be. I won't even point out any of these things other than to simply say the model takes the information you put in, it generates a whole bunch of values, and then this is what the output looks like. This is actually where it's really valuable to you. In this case, you can see this blue line is what the cost of this unit would look like moving forward if all you did was repair it. The green line, is the one in the middle, is what the cost of that unit would look like if you rebuild it, in this particular case with whatever the information was. And the last one was what would be the cost if you replaced it. Now the thing to point out here is over here, all the way over here, that repairing this thing is the lowest cost in year 1, right? You see rebuilding it's more expensive, replacing it's a whole lot more expensive in year 1. By year 2, that rebuild is actually less expensive in this particular scenario. This is very scenario specific than repairing. So is whatever extra money it costs for a rebuild, if you're planning on operating this thing at least 2 years, rebuilding would be less expensive. And you can see that gap grows in year 3. On the other hand, rebuild or replace is pretty expensive in year 1, still more expensive in year 2. By year 3 in this scenario, it's nearly the same as if you were to repair it. But then on year 4, I'm about even with the rebuild. Then years 5 and on, this gap is how much more money you're going to spend if you keep that unit in service than if you would have replaced it. And this is one of the values of this tool. We know you guys are sometimes having to explain to your bosses why you don't want to spend this money on this piece of equipment. And this tool's intended to give you the operation. Boss, over the next 5 years, we're going to end up costing us X $1,000 if we don't replace this thing now versus just repairing it. Because we know that this thing's going to continue to have cost. higher cost than that new use piece of equipment. So the bottom line is this tool is intended to be ammunition for you guys. It's intended to be a tool you can take and help explain these things to your bosses, as well as provide some structure to the decision making, especially if you're a decentralized agency, like I know, for instance, like New York State DOT, very decentralized. A lot of these decisions are being made at the district level rather than the district. Those guys, this gives you a way of trying to force some kind of consistency in these decisions. So here's a simple one-slide example on this thing, and then we're going to walk through this, one of these presentations I was talking about. This is a simple example. In this case, you can see the scenario, pretty common scenario, 3/4 ton, two-wheel drive pickups, got fairly minor damage. The operator it gives the scenario what happened. He was performing routine winter maintenance when the accident occurred. Bought that unit for $29,900. To replace it's going to be $33,500. It's currently active, and you got 382 units of the same type. Now that's telling you 382. I can afford to leave this thing down a day or two, probably, because I've got a lot of other equipment of this type. A line striper would be a different animal altogether. You got one-on-one. But in any case, what you would see in this particular scenario, you had an initiation score, which is when you just put the stuff in the spreadsheet. It gave an initiation score of 87.5 to repair, and after you played around with all you decided to go, well, should I rebuild or should I repair? In this scenario, this is a fairly new piece of equipment, or damages are fairly minor, and you can see that it's recommended that you just repair, you don't rebuild, and you ended up with a score evaluating of that. And like I say, it's highly adaptable, it's highly adjustable. You guys don't have to stick with the base values. You can decide whether to use a criteria, not use a criteria, increase the emphasis on one, decrease it on another one. But we will tell you that we went through multiple iterations, as Dennis will say, with your Pete Maurer DOT colleagues, as you saw from the front. So we feel, frankly, out of the box, it's pretty good. It's not going to fit every scenario, but it's pretty good. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do now is there's two videos, and these are actually on the NCHRP website as well. By the way, I'll hope to show you a little later if we have time. You can look up all these projects that Tim talked about. You can go to the TRB website. You can put in NCHRP 13 project series, and you'll have a list of all these projects, because all the projects that have been done under the equipment committee have been a 13 series project to date. And you can see all these projects, and it'll give you a link to the report. It'll give you, and in lots of cases, that report has a tool that you can download. In some cases, like this one, it even has videos and PowerPoints and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the bottom line is there's probably $2 million worth of research out there that's answers that's intended to give you guys a lot of help. And as we said earlier, it's not being used very much. So it's sort of a shame that obviously there was envisioned to be a need for it. So let's go ahead and run this video here. And let's see here. Got to run it. Okay. And
recommended use of the tool is to save a clean copy for each individual analysis appropriately made to reflect that. And this indicator.
do you want me to restart it? Okay, we can do it. It won't take but a second. I know what I forgot to do was take it out of the presentation mode. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm gonna just close this thing and take it back to the beginning. And let's try it again.
This video is to provide an introduction and overview of the core article, and is designed to help key managers with the decision of what to do with the piece of that equipment. We'll start here in the first tab, this introduction tab. At the top, you'll notice it provides basic information, summary of the tool, and there's two modules. We'll discuss those in a second, as well as the color schemes. Perhaps most importantly is this ready to begin indicator. Recommended use of the tool is to save a clean copy for each individual analysis appropriately aiming to reflect that. And this indicator, ready to begin, reflects the fact that this tool currently does not contain user input information. It is a clean copy and ready to use. This is important so that user information from a previous or another analysis isn't inadvertently included. The tool consists of two modules, a decision module and an economic analysis module. The decision module, as described here, and is contained on these first four green tabs. The steps to using the decision module are listed, and in the center you'll see this flow chart that reflects how the decision process is made and the recommendations that result from it. It's a dynamic chart, and as user inputs are provided and recommendations are reached, the red X's will turn to green check marks to show the flow from the initiation to one of the four repair, rebuild, replace, retire outcomes. On each of those tabs, as the inputs are provided and recommendations are made, is a chart that looks like this chart on the right. This is an example, but it shows the score based on the user input and the recommendation. Below that is the information on the economic analysis module that's contained in this red tab number 5. The economic analysis module is designed to provide information to the user about the future and economic impacts of the decision. We'll cover that module in a separate video. So now let's go to this starting point, the initiation tab, tab number 1 here. On the left-hand side, you see 11 criteria in need of user input. And on the right-hand side, you see a chart, the pressure gauge chart that currently indicates no score because user inputs have not been provided. Looking at each of the criteria, you'll notice that there's a checkbox to exclude that variable. The user can simply check that box to include or exclude a variable from the analysis. There's an area for user inputs, and there's also a link for each of those for more information. Clicking on this link will take the user to the definitions tab. And on the definitions tab for each input, there is a description of that input as well as potential sources of data to help the user in providing that input. So if your user is not familiar with one of the criteria, we highly recommend that you review this information and consider the sources of data that are provided. Back to our initiation tab. Let's consider a relatively simple example. Let's consider the situation where we have a machine in need of repair, say $5,000 worth of repair, and we have a repair limit of $20,000 based on some estimated value of the asset or fleet policy or similar basis. The age of that machine, let's say, is relatively young. 5,000 hours on a 12,000 hour replacement. And you can change the units of this from years, hours, and miles. And so here, based on this input, as well as the sort of default values that can certainly be changed to the other criteria, we see that we have a score of 78.7. Which results in a recommendation to repair. We'll go further with that in a second. These other criteria can be used to further refine. So right now, resale value of an asset may be high. So we can set that a little higher, and we notice that our score goes down a bit because perhaps there could be some value in selling this asset and realizing that higher resale value. Expected time to repair, perhaps this has been a particularly well-performing economically asset. Let's say that our life-to-date cost is $16 an hour, and for assets in this class, maybe we would expect them to be $22 an hour. And so you see that the score went up, increased a bit, because you want to keep in your fleet a well-performing, economically performing asset. And so each of these criteria can be used to further refine this score. But in this situation, we have a relatively high score of 82.4, which is a pretty strong indication that repair versus not repairing is the recommended action is the appropriate action. It also tells us that if our score is greater than 50, which it is, that we should go to tab 2A, rebuild versus repair. We can click this green box here to get there, or we can click the 2A tab down here to get there as well. And on this tab, now that we're going to perform some repair action on an asset, the question is how much? Do we simply make the repair, or do we take a larger rebuild action and improve the condition of the asset? And so here, some information is brought forward, such as the age of the machine and the condition of the machine. But other criteria are present as well, such as is rebuild an option for this class or not? If it's not, and we have funds available, and these other criteria are as they're set, then we have a pretty strong recommendation score of 13 out of 100 to repair the asset. If rebuild is not an option, then repair is the recommended action in this case, based on the information we have. And so if we can do a couple of things. We go back to this introduction tab, and you see that our flow chart is updated to show that we should consider rebuild versus repair, and in fact, we should repair our asset based on the user information provided. We can also go to our output tab here and see that these scores are reflected here in terms of our initiation scores as well as our rebuild versus repair score. Our recommended output is repair, and then below is a summary of our inputs that is set up and ready to print to the user to provide a paper documentation or PDF documentation of the decision process as well. Let's go back and let's make a slight change. So let's keep our estimated cost of repair limit, but instead of the machine being slightly less than half of its replacement age, what if it was 10,000 hours? So it's closer to its replacement age. It's not completely there, right? In this instance, the repair versus no repair is still recommended a repair action. Keep the asset and make improvements to it. And now we go to our rebuild versus repair tab. And again, if rebuild is not an option, then the recommendation is repair. It's not quite as strong because our asset's a little bit older. But if rebuild is an option, and we have funds available to do it, we have a good condition asset, which we did, right? And all of these other inputs are as is. Now we see a recommended action rebuild. Here, the machine is much closer to its replacement age. It would probably make more sense to make a larger investment and repair not just the immediate problem at hand, but to improve the overall condition of the asset and extend its life. Let's go back again to our initiation tab. And now let's increase the age a little bit further, and let's say it's 14,000 hours or beyond its replacement age. Now you notice that the recommended action switched over to no repair. So now we have an asset that is beyond its replacement life, and the recommendation is not to repair. And now we go to 2B, the replace versus retire tab. We're not going to repair it, what do we do with it? And based the information provided here, which is typical utilization in the past for this asset. It's been used a normal amount. It's expected to be used a normal amount going forward. We have funds available, and replacement costs and replacement time are typical or average, and we can adjust these. If replacement cost is slightly lower, then the replacement score goes up a bit. And if the time to replace is maybe slightly longer, as it is now, maybe that score goes down a bit. But regardless, the overall score is above 50, which is an indication that the asset should be replaced, which makes sense. We have an asset that is beyond its replacement life, that has been used and will be used, and we have money to make that replacement within the fleet. However, if we have an asset that was perhaps not used much in the past, and perhaps won't be used much in the future, maybe for whatever reason, now the replacement score switches to a very low score, indicating we should retire that asset without replacement. So that's a short brief demo of each of the four outcomes. We've looked at the output tab here that reflects the scores and the analysis that we've done and the recommendation. The one tab we've skipped over so far is in the weights tab. And the weights tab is simply a listing of each of the criteria from all the three tabs on the decision model. And again, we have a checkbox to exclude that asset, or I'm sorry, that criteria from the analysis. So we can simply take it out of the analysis, or we have a slider bar that allows us to adjust the weight of that. And you notice that as we do that, the relative weight for each of the criteria that go into the decision, and in this case, the repair decision, gets adjusted appropriately. So if we were to exclude resale value, then you'll notice that that weight goes to 0, and the weight that criteria did have was reallocated across the other criteria going into the decision. And so you see the criteria that go into the repair decision, you see the criteria that go into the rebuild decision, and you see the criteria that go into the replace decision, and the weight can be adjusted appropriately. Our output tab documents the results of all of that analysis.
How much time for you, Dennis?
You have for this session, another 15, 17 minutes.
Okay. That's all inclusive, right, of Q&A as well. There is another YouTube video, for lack of a better term, for the other part of that module. I'd be happy to show you folks. It's a little more complex, but I guess I didn't want to move, or the question was whether we stop with Q&A before we want to make sure we cover all of our material, or go through that other one. It's about the same length as this one. Do you think you guys would like to see that second module, or do you have some questions about what you've seen before, or you have a preference? Anyone? Some brave soul give opinion.
Any questions before we go to the next one?
Would you want to, if there's no question, then let's go ahead and show the other, show that same video. I will tell you guys, I think, and this was, I hope I made this point earlier, this is a very user adjustable model. If the question came up, can you cook the books with this thing? Absolutely. If you're determined you can cook the books and make the outcome what you want it to be. Obviously, at the point that you're cooking the books, you're sort of destroying the value of the module. If you're going to cook the books anyway, just do what the hell you want and don't worry about what the module says. But this is, I think, a good tool for that purpose. So let's just go ahead and go to this second part. And like I said, this is honestly, it's a little scarier looking than it actually is. So.
The second one will indicate that you cook the books.
All right, so, and here we go.
This video is to provide an introduction to the core R tool that is designed to assist fleet managers with the decision of what to do with a piece of down equipment, and specifically the economic analysis module of that tool. So we'll start here on the introduction tab. At the top, you'll notice that it provides background information. This is all covered in the previous video regarding the decision module tool. Provides information on the decision module, and near the bottom it provides information on the economic
Analysis module. Recall that the economic analysis module is designed to help fleet managers understand the future economic impacts of the decision made today to either repair, rebuild, replace, or, well, retire, but there's no economic impact to the retire decision. What's the future economic impacts of those decisions? And so we'll go straight to this red tab, number 5, economic analysis. Contains the economic analysis module. And at the top, there's some basic input information regarding the asset in question. What's its current age? Here, we're going to use an example of 9,000 hours. How much do we plan to work that each year going forward? 2,000 hours. What's its current estimated equipment value? $80,000. And then we have the A and B coefficients that describe its life-to-date operating costs. And here we have an A coefficient of 2 and a B coefficient of 0.003. And those have been found using basic trend line fitting in Excel to some historical operating cost data. So we have this set of inputs, and then box number 2, we have a set of inputs for each of the potential outcomes: the repair outcome, the rebuild outcome, and the replace outcome. And we'll work through each of those. So for the repair outcome, the estimated repair cost is $8,000. And then the user is asked to provide information about the depreciation method. As this is a 9,000 hour old machine, it may very well be fully depreciated, and so the depreciation method applied in this situation may be none. The user can select from 3 other depreciation methods: straight line, sum of years, digits, and declining balance, and then provide the necessary information for each of those, and we'll look at those under the other scenarios. And so here we have the current machine with an estimated repair cost of $8,000 and no further depreciation applied to it. And what we do is we calculate, what the tool does is we calculate for each year going forward, up to 10 years, what's the age going forward of the asset, and what's its effective age. As it's a 9,000 hour old machine now, the effective age is 9,000. And next year, after we work at 2,000 hours, it'll be 11 and 13, etc. And we look at each of those years, a set of buy, operate, sell transactions. So right now, we are buying the machine, quote, buying the machine for $80,000, its current value. Next year, we're going to operate it for 2,000 hours based upon our A and B coefficients for our operating costs. It'll cost us $124,000 to generate those 2,000 hours. And at the end of that, we would be able to sell that asset for $80,000. No further depreciation of the asset. And that would give us a cost rate for those 2,000 hours of $62. And then we could do that for each year, and as you see, the cost will increase. Now, under the rebuild option, let's look at a scenario where if we rebuild the asset, we can turn back the age of the asset about 2,500 hours. It's going to cost us $60,000 to do that. So you have an $80,000 asset that we've invested $60,000 into, but perhaps we can only realize half of that investment in the value of the asset. So at the end of that rebuild, it's not worth $80,000, it's worth $110,000. And now that we've made this capital investment, we may want to depreciate the capital investment in the rebuild process. We may want to depreciate that a bit. And so we've chosen the straight line method. We're going to depreciate it from its $110,000 post-rebuild value over a 3-year period to a value of $75,000. And so now we look at each year, we buy our asset for $140 because that is our current value plus our rebuild cost. We operate it for 2,000 hours, again based upon, but now our machine age has been rewound, so it looks more like a 65 to 8,500 hour machine over those 2,000 hours. And so we can operate for those 2,000 hours at a cost of $94,000, and then we can sell that asset. If we were to sell that asset at the end of that year, we would realize something like $98,000, and that would give us a cost rate of $68 an hour for that rebuilt machine. And as you can see, those costs vary throughout its life. They decrease as the depreciation occurs, and then once depreciation is over, they climb as the operating costs climb. The third option is to replace the asset, and here we would have to replace the asset with a new machine valued at $500,000, and perhaps we would apply an accelerated depreciation methodology to that, so the declining balance, and we would depreciate that over a 5-year period to, again, an end value of $75,000. And so again, we buy the asset for $500,000. We operate it at relatively low cost because it's a young machine in its early life. And then we can sell it for its estimated depreciated value, and calculate a cost rate, life-to-date cost rate for that. And the results are provided in 2 forms. The first is in chart form. On the left-hand side, you see an hourly rate versus age chart, and you see it for each of the 3 potential outcomes. So the repaired machine is this blue line with the blue dots, and the hourly rate as the machine ages is reflected by this line. The rebuilt machine is the green line with the green squares, and the replacement machine is the orange line with the orange triangles. And so we see initially, if we were only going to keep the machine and work it for 2,000 hours, 1 year, then our best option is to simply make the repair, keep the asset, and sell it after 2,000 hours. That is our cheapest hourly rate for the 3 outcomes. The most expensive would be to replace the machine, right? Buy a new asset, operate at 2,000 hours, and sell it. That would be the most dollars per hour for that 1 year of operation. What this allows us to do is to see how much use is required for it to make sense to choose an outcome. For example, at 2,000 hours, it makes the most sense to repair the machine. If I'm going to work it 4,000 hours, replacement's still not a good option, but repair and rebuild are much closer in cost. And so it may still not make sense to rebuild, but once we get to 6,000 hours, it probably makes sense to consider rebuilding the machine. And ultimately, if we're going to work 10,000 more hours, if we think we got 10,000 more hours of work for this type of an asset, it probably makes sense to replace the machine. So this helps the user begin to understand when each option makes the most economic sense. And we have that in terms of hours work going forward, as well as age based upon the years. We also have a chart that shows us what is the total cost based on each outcome. And so let's imagine we were going to work 12,000 hours. If we're going to work 12,000 hours, we could do that for about $880,000 with a replacement machine, just under $1 million for a rebuilt machine, and about $1.1 million for a repaired machine. So again, it helps us begin to understand when it makes sense for each of the outcomes. Additionally, there's output that helps us understand what the costs of each option are. So here we see the cost of choosing rebuild instead of repair. So our cheapest at 2,000, and for each year, right, each row is a year. And so in the first year, our best option was to repair. So if we were to rebuild the machine, then we would expect there to be a cost to that. In fact, the cost of rebuilding the machine and operating it for 1 year and then disposing of that asset is about $12,000. Right? It would be $12,000 cheaper to repair it as opposed to rebuild it. A positive value means there's a cost to rebuilding. But quickly we begin to see that it's actually cheaper to rebuild the machine than it is to repair it. And we see that. We see that the green line dips below the blue line at year 2 and separates itself going forward. And so we begin to see that it's actually cheaper to rebuild a machine and keep it over a 4-year period and operate it over a 4-year period than it is to operate a repaired machine. We also see the same analysis for replacing the machine instead of repairing it. So rebuild versus repair, replace versus repair, and rebuild versus replace. So it helps us begin to understand the costs associated with decisions at any point in time. And then this table here is, this table on the far right is the cost of choosing. So if we were going to operate a machine for 10,000 hours, it would cost us $860,000 to operate that repaired machine. It would cost us $775,000 to have the rebuilt machine, and it would cost us $745,000 to have the replacement machine. So it helps us begin to understand the relative costs of each of these options as well. And so the economic analysis tab is really designed to allow the user to look forward and consider the economic impacts associated with each of the possible decisions.
Okay. As I said, hopefully you thought John did a good job of explaining that. I certainly feel like he did a better job than I can try to make you do it on the spot here like this. So long and short of it is, like I said, this is a release product. Even though this is a fairly analytical, there's a lot of numbers in this thing. If you take them one by one, it's not that tough, especially on that first module. The second one's a little harder, but only because it sounds a little more intimidating, talking about, the A and B squared values and so on and so forth. But just understand that in the guide or in the actual documentation, we have a fairly long user guide that explains what each of these things, decision points are, and how to calculate that A and B squared value and so on and so forth. And it's really, once you break it down and take them one at a time, it's not that hard. And in fact, anyone that's ever done a life cycle analysis on their fleet or had one done for them, you heard me talking earlier about that capital cost curve and the maintenance and repair cost curve. There's always a trend line that the Excel gives you, and you pick that A and B coefficient right off that trend line. So if you've ever seen one of those done, you've already got the base material to try to calculate that. But in any case, like I say, I think the key point from this project description we're talking about is that this is intended to be a tool for you guys, folks. Your choice of when to use it and how to use it is up to you. Now, one of the things that we did was a compromise at the front of this thing was we knew, you heard him say, John say, that when you download this tool, it's not got any values completed, and that you should save that original one as each time you do it as a new one. In other words, you want to be able to start with a clean copy. The reason for that's real simple. For us to be able to reset this tool back to its base values after you've run it would require the use of a macro. And we know from experience that lots of DOTs are working on networks, their computers. You have to get IT to get you permission to run a macro. And IT's got to be satisfied that it's a safe. And it can turn into, a major effort to try to do these things. So the bottom line was to avoid that issue. You just download the thing, you save the master, and then each time you want to use it, you just resave it as a new version. I'd even suggest using it for whatever equipment number or whatever you use. So, and when you use it, do you use it every time? I wouldn't, to be frank with you. I would use it on those ones that are hard to make. It's the middle that's tough. The machine's halfway through its life and it's got a big dollar repair on it. That's a tough decision, especially if it's like at the 3/4 mark. It's still got, a quarter of its life left, but you've got to spend a lot more money on it to get it back in service. That's not an easy decision to make. That's where these tools can come into effect. And you guys can operationalize it however you want to do it. If you want to let people in the field do it, if you want this to be your baby and you make all the decisions, it's up to you. But the bottom line is that was what the intention of the tool was. So.
Any questions? This is probably rather, but how do you add life back to something? So all of our condition models are based off of what our identified lifespan is for any one class of equipment. And a rebuild program has to have a systematic way to say this investment equals this much life added to this piece of equipment, which would then negate everything that you've done to manage that throughout its life cycle, because then you just changed the life cycle. You've made it an atypical asset for the whole program. How does that account for that?
In terms of that is exactly what you're doing when you're making a rebuild investment. Is you're making it an atypical asset. You're putting it on its own trajectory. Like I say, the easiest thing for me to think of it is you've rewound the clock. The question is simply how much have you rewound the clock? Effectively, it's a younger asset than it actually is, but really it's up to you. There's no guidance in this document. It's in cursive. How much did we rewind the clock? Because it depends on the extent to which you actually did a rebuild. A frame-off restoration, I doubt any of you guys really do that. That's like for, that's for show cars and stuff. But, something where you get in there and you go in, rebuild the differential, you rebuild the transmission, you rebuild the engine. Because initially you had an engine blow, you had a transmission blow. You're going to spend a lot of money, so should you, while you got the equipment down, make that additional investment? You get all that done. Now this is Henry talking. I've run fleets before I became a consultant. I was in the trucking industry for 20-some years. You still got at the end of it, one of the things that's really important, I think you got to keep in mind is they asked you to say, are you going to use this thing the same moving forward as you have in the past? It's been my experience. I don't care what you spend on that machine. If a guy's got a choice to use a younger machine, he's going to use it. And you always see that actual utilization dropping on this equipment as it ages, no matter what you invest in it. That's the reason I find this rebuild thing problematic. But the panel asked us to include that potential in there, and we have it. I think we've included it as good as you could be. But again, you guys know that you rebuild a 12-year-old plow truck, it's still a 12-year-old plow truck. It still doesn't drive as good as a new one. It still doesn't have all the bells and whistles, and so on and so forth. Probably not going to upholster the seats, that's still going to look crummy or whatever. But anyway, that's the point. You got a tool here. We think it's a valuable tool. Tim indicated this is one of the projects that they've asked to push for implementation. How would this thing be implemented? We're trying to figure that, well, it really would depend on the proposal that was accepted. I suspect there's basically two options on these implementations. One, DOT says, holds their hand up, says, I want to do this, and I'm willing to put some of my money to get some consulting help to come out there and help us. And the NCHRP put some more money in there, and now you've got to budget it. But in turn for you doing that, for the NCHRP giving you some of that money, you're going to have to agree to get up and talk about it at these conferences. What was your experience with it, and so on. So the other way, which I suspect may be the way this one was done, is that the project would involve having a series of regional fleet conferences like this, And at that conference, you'd have a half-day session where each of you would be sitting down with a computer or something, would be working through cases. And you'd be playing with the thing while you've got somebody looking over your shoulder to help you and working through the scenarios and help you understand the sensitivity. That's the thing you got to understand with these models, is what things that make a really big swing in this and what others don't. But in any event, that's the product. I hope you fellows get some value out of it. We really do want to see this stuff implemented more energetically moving forward.
Any other questions as we close on this project?
Henry, on that project, so is there any like preload of equipment data, or is it all as you go through, as you work? So is there a database that pulls the data from?
This is a completely standalone tool. Honestly, a lot of you, I mean, I know from looking at various studies in the past, a lot of you are using equipment management systems that have some degree of life cycle analysis or the ability to put data together. So no, this is not intended to be linked in any particular way, but it really can take a lot of the data from your system to help populate, so you're making educated decisions rather than just guesstimating it, holding your thumb up and taking a Kentucky windage on what you think it is. But no, it's not a built-in, it's not a tool. It's designed to be, automatically extract data. That is, and again, that was intentional. The more that you make it like commercial software, the more it becomes proprietary and the more it becomes a black box, and all of a sudden nobody either knows how to use it or trusts it.